Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, legal and government correspondent, and today our guest, somebody you should be familiar with, our State Representative Shannon Zimmerman. Shannon,
Jamie,
welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really do appreciate it.
No, it's great that you came on the show. I understand that the legislature has gavelled out.
Correct.
And you're the representative to the Assembly from, I'm blanking on the district.
30th Assembly District.
30th Assembly District. So, because I was thinking of the Senate District, there's 3 Assembly Districts in every Senate District and everything. So, you are just finished, this, and so there's going to be an election in the fall. We're going to get to that at a future interview. Sure. But this is a conclusion of what, your third term? Or
third term. This is my third term.
Okay. And you followed Dean Knudsen, right?
I did. Yes,
okay.
I did.
So, and we won't get into his travails on the Wisconsin Election Commission, right?
Yep, right.
That's a whole nother show.
Right.
But no, you're here to tell us what's been happening in the legislature. But I caught your press conference on the Wisconsin Data Privacy Act, and I want to just ask you, where does it stand? Has it been approved by both hoses? Is it ready for the governor's signature? Yep. Where is it at?
Okay. Well, maybe what is it? Maybe we right.
That.
So thank you. That was where I was going to go first. So let me just give you a little bit of foundation. As you may recall, I have spent the better part of my career in the technology sector. My wife and I were very fortunate, started a business in River Falls. I think in 2011, we actually were the St. Croix County Large Business of the Year. So it was just a fantastic journey, very blessed, certainly to do that. But during those years, I picked up, pretty substantial information on, tech, big tech, how it all works and so forth. And the optimist in me and the tech geek in me loves the following, right? We're kind of entering this phase where the convergence of 3 distinct technological things are coming together, and I'm really excited for it, right? So number one, big data. Big data is not new or novel, been around a little while, but we're getting more sophisticated and more optimized in how we use it. Number 2, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, AI, is nothing more than a computer's ability to start to think for itself. Third and finally, and this is important, is we are achieving quantum computing levels. So we can process information faster than ever before. You take those 3 things, it is incredibly powerful. I said at the press conference, if you recall, I feel like in my lifetime, we're going to see cures to cancer as a result of this innovation and this technology. Super tough problems that we have faced will be solved. So those are all the good things. However, the reason that I feel that the Wisconsin Data Privacy Act is so important, not only to Wisconsin residents, I think nationally and globally this is a big deal, is because the power of data, the privacy or intrusion of some people with your data is still the wild, wild west, right? The federal government hasn't totally figured out what to do and how to regulate this a little bit, nor certainly has the states. A few states now, by the way, have picked up what I would consider to be bills that are strikingly similar to what I've authored here. I've got a few variations. But the bottom line is that people have a general confidence that information that you would normally deem private should in fact be private. So for example, imagine you're at home and you're having a private conversation with your spouse, and I'm not picking on Alexa here, but I'll use an Alexa as an example. It's reasonable for you to think that that private conversation should remain private, right? That shouldn't be shared or distributed. Well, maybe you are being recorded. For example, most of the webmail platforms, right? There's a number of them out there. Some are very popular. In the fine print, actually, you're a lawyer, so you're probably very good at reading the fine print, but I've actually read these documents. Every bit of email coming in and out of your inbox is their property. They can use it to feed their AI engines to do whatever it is that they need to do. I just felt simply that a Wisconsin resident should have 3 basic rights when it comes to this. Number 1, the Wisconsin Data Privacy Act would allow a Wisconsin resident to say, data collector, whomever that may be, what do you have on me, right? What information have you collected? How did you, whatever the case may be. Number 2, to whom have you shared or sold that information? Very relevant. And then third and finally, stop, delete it. I'm not comfortable anymore with what you're doing, so let's stop this right now. So that's what it does. Now, in terms of where it's at, the second part of your question, I was successful in navigating it through the House for a majority vote, so it has passed the Wisconsin House.
Now, what was the vote in the Assembly? Was it all? It wasn't partisan because this is not a partisan bill.
So it did lean more partisan, and I'll tell you why. Because I've got some good Democrat friends that they were even in committee saying this is just great. I followed up to say, well, what happened? I said, well, we think it should go further. I'm like, I do too, but I'm going to walk before I run. And to go further, just to give you a sense, right? There's all kinds of techno jargon like opt-in, opt-out, and there's different ways you can build this legislation. The more strict you become, the more resistance naturally that I would have been met with, okay? And so it was important to me. I don't want to sacrifice good in a pursuit of great and never get there, right? My job is to deliver legislation.
Don't let the perfect defeat the good.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so I had committed in my last election cycle that this was going to be a top priority of mine, and I was going to get this across the finish line. So after the fact, I would talk to a number of my Democrat colleagues, and I said, well, I'll be back. I'll be back next cycle. We're going to get this thing done, and if we need to do some tweaks, let's talk about it. We'll figure out what we need to do, and maybe there is some room to go further. I'm certainly open to talking about that. But yeah, so the vote was a little more on the partisan side, if you will, but it cleared the House. For lack of a better label, it died in the Senate. Just the clock ran out. So session expired before the Senate could pick it up and take action on it.
And the way legislation is set up, it has to be introduced past one house, introduced past the other house before the end of the session. Otherwise, it's the same as if it was never introduced.
You got it. You got it. Now, that's exactly correct.
It does not like it is freeze-framed and then you pick it up like a game at Wrigley that might be delayed due to rain or something like that.
You got it.
Okay.
So what the goodness, though, however, in accomplishing a floor vote and getting it there, I was able to get through, that chamber of the legislature, working with the majority leader and the speaker, get it to the floor. Because, just because I think I have a great bill doesn't mean it gets to the floor and is voted upon. And so that was all successful, and the vote did pass. So what that means, more than likely, is I will pivot right back around right after inauguration and get this bill back out there. Now that everybody has seen it once, in theory, it should be moving much quicker and just get through the process, allow the Senate time to take action on it, and get it to the governor's desk next session.
This is not a bill that has, does it have any dollars attached to it such that somebody would want to attach it to and say it's an appropriations type of bill?
So the Department of Justice conducted some analysis on the bill because they have to produce what's called a fiscal, right? How much is this going to cost us? Their original estimate was just under $1 million of staff. They thought they would need 7 people, agents, if you will. My comparison in Virginia, Washington, and other states who have picked this up might have just been a misinterpretation, I believe. Okay. Now, the bill also has a penalty component within it of $7,500 per violation of this act, this law. Now, just to give you a sense here, right?
So there's an enforcement mechanism.
There absolutely is an enforcement mechanism. And this is not, I did not write in the bill, allowing any individual to file suit. What has to happen for this bill to be triggered is you report a violation to the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin. Now, like all good attorney generals, they're going to conduct some investigation. Maybe they got multiple people saying, hey, we've got a bad actor here. Their next move is to put that bad actor, that data collector, on notice. Hey, we've got a problem here. Take some action. Should that bad actor not remedy the situation, then the penalties can be imposed and the Attorney General would take action.
Okay. So there's almost a right to cure, so to speak.
That's exactly what it is. There is a right to cure.
So it's not a gotcha bill that you find somebody in a technical violation and then you hammer them.
Yep, exactly. And we didn't have a right of a private, pursuit there, if you will, because that could clog up our judicial system more than maybe it already is.
Right. And there are bills, and I won't get into those, but yeah, introduced in lots of legislatures about private enforcement mechanisms.
Yep.
And that's where you get into, clogging up the court system,
yep.
I guess. So for this bill, now I'm curious, were there lobbyists against you? Did you have? Who?
Yeah.
Who was against it?
So I had some interesting folks come out both for and against it. There's a couple big tech companies that maybe would surprise people came out all for it. Microsoft was all for it. Salesforce.com, Apple, all for it. There were a couple groups against it. One, in fact, the Wisconsin Manufacturers Group, WMC. They're kind of the state's chamber of commerce.
Were they worried that it would impact small business more than big business?
Here was their concern was simply this. They said, Shannon, we think this should be taken up at the federal level, and the states should not put together a tapestry of their own legislation. I get it, Jamie. I totally understand it. I don't want to make things more difficult for businesses. But here was my point back and my response. A, with all due respect, not much gets done at the federal level at all anymore. And my job is to
the alternative is no regulation then.
Bingo.
Right? Yeah.
So my job is to deliver for the constituents in Western Wisconsin and Wisconsin residents. So I'm going to go for this. Next, we had an unusual opposition here, the Wisconsin Grocers Association in combination with Quick Trip. Their concern was solely that they thought that this bill would adversely affect their loyalty programs, right? So you get your Quick Trip card, you go in there and you spend enough money and you get your Karuba coffee and whatever it is, you know, your loyalty points. This bill would not have an adverse effect on that. They could still, you know, they can still do that because today I actually have the Quick Trip loyalty card.
Yeah,
I can opt. I can opt out anytime I want already. Mm-hmm. So my point to them was, I'm not trying to get at, you know, understanding how much, you know, coffee I buy at Quick Trip on an annual basis. The scope of this bill is going a bit deeper. It's when people are obtaining information that you know that is private to you, right? I mean, if someone walked in your living room tonight, sat down and just listened and started taking notes, you'd call the Hudson Police Department, right? Well, that could be happening to a lot of people. They simply don't realize it's happening.
Well, that's what the part when I listened to your press conference that freaked me out. It's one thing when people, you know, get on their devices, and it used to be PCs. Now I guess everyone has tablets or their own smartphone. But just simply like clicking on an email that says, you know, enter to win a free car. And so they go to that and then they enter a bunch of data. Now, those folks I don't have as much sympathy for because they're voluntarily putting their stuff out there. And if they don't read the fine print, they got to know that information is being sold.
Yeah.
But what freaks me out is the conversations, like you said, with, you know, my wife and I, we were talking about, you know, maybe going to a particular location for a trip, and the next day on Facebook, there are ads about going to that place. And it was like, I didn't go on any computer, I didn't enter any data.
And that, the research we did, Jamie, and the stories we heard back, young girl was pregnant, teenage girl, obviously not planned, had not told her parents yet, suddenly started receiving all kinds of baby-related advertisements and products in the mail. I mean, here's the thing. When you're not paying for the product, you're the product. It's that simple. But here's the argument that these data collectors make. And in the fine print, if you read it, they're essentially saying value for value. Okay, so you want to use that fancy smartphone. Well, in the fine print, when you say accept to activate the phone and actually use it, unknowingly they're listening, they're recording when you don't even realize it, right? And so I just felt like that is a violation of people's privacy rights. That should not be tolerated. In Europe, for example, the GDPR is a standard that was implemented in Europe a few years back. It does so much more than what
GDPR?
Global Data Protection Regulation.
Okay.
It is the Wisconsin Data Privacy Act on steroids. It's a lot more, goes a lot further, right, than what we did here. But people are still using their, because the theory was, well, if this bill goes into place, then Apple's not going to let me use my phone anymore because I can't say yes on that. No, you'll still be able to use your phone, believe me. And it's working across Europe. Smartphones are prevalent across Europe, and they're living with the GDPR regulation. This is just good legislation that I happen to have a perspective on, have experience with. You know, within our caucus, there's a lot of people who have pretty good tech backgrounds, some zero. And this whole concept was foreign to them. So there was a lot of meetings where I spent time educating, sharing research and information that we had obtained. But I'm excited. I'm going to get this thing through next session. that's going to be a big priority for me.
And I mean, there's precedent for a lot of legislation or laws in Wisconsin that didn't get through on its first time into the legislature.
Yep.
There's great ideas that are hashed, but they don't even get to the Senate or the Assembly floor to get even voted on once.
Right. You're right.
So you got the, there's a whole spectrum of successive bills, but ones that can get debated over multiple sessions tend to work those bugs out, right,
Yes.
over time?
Oh, I am a proponent of thoughtful legislation. Think twice, act once, right? That is so true. I actually first introduced a version of this, a pretty potent, powerful version of this, the session before this one.
Okay.
Now, it was late in the session. I knew it had no chance of getting out. But the reason that I did that is there's nothing like flushing out who's going to like or hate your bill than having a public hearing. Because the minute it's introduced, then you find out. And I quickly found out. And as an example, an unusual group of folks showed up at the hearing from the insurance industry. And they said, we got concerns. We've got a lot of concerns because we use a lot of data to make risk decisions on auto insurance or whatever the case may be. Between that day and when we got this to the floor, I worked in collaboration with the insurance industry, their lobbyists. We got everything taken care of. I was still true to my bill and defending, the Wisconsin resident, but also mitigated the risks, or the concerns that they had.
Yeah, you cannot think out every possible permutation of your bill, and so when somebody says, I think this is bad for me, can you look at that and change it? I mean, anything can always be improved and, like 100%. You said, work out bugs. So
100%.
Along those lines of ideas that get hashed and may take a few sessions, few years to get through, can I switch the topic?
Please.
Now to the penny tax and, for schools.
Educational funding.
Educational funding.
Yes.
Because
I'm surprised you'd have an interest in that.
That's right. Well, yes. Been around for 9 years in getting used to. I mean, it takes years to learn all the intricacies, and I'm still no expert on school funding, but it is highly complicated.
Yep.
And I've seen at least one, if not two, blue ribbon commissions trying to change how schools are funded, and nothing gets done.
Yeah.
They get the ideas, dozens, if not hundreds of ideas, and then nothing gets done. So you've got an example in Iowa where they do that. And so have you been talking to folks? And the idea, I guess we should tell our viewers what we're talking about, because the penny tax is, right now, schools are funded, and ideally it'd be 2/3 by state sources, and then only 1/3 by property tax. But that varies wildly throughout our state based on what you've got for property and valuations. And
levy limits,
that's right. So we have districts north of us where there's lakes, and they'll be 95% on the property tax, only get 5% state aid, and then there's others that get tons and tons of state aid. And Hudson happens to be one where we've flipped the ratio, and we're way more on property tax than we are on state aid. So trying to look for something that not so harsh on our property tax payers, which can hurt our elderly, people on fixed incomes. Really want to see property taxes be controlled, and yet you've got districts where maybe they've got more economic activity, they're able to do a little bit more with their buildings, and if we can fund that with a penny sales tax, you got a different source of revenue rather than
So just to define it, right? So let's the state of Iowa, bipartisan support, put this forth a number of years ago. I do and must give credit to Superintendent Nicolette. Nick has been diligent in following up with me on this. He introduced me to the topic. I would later reach out to some Iowa legislators to get their take on it. How did it work? What problems did you run into? Define it. So credit to Nick and certainly a number of the folks who have really been involved in this process. But what it does simply is it's a penny tax on all purchases. It's a sales tax, if you will. And those funds go into a bucket, and they're used for two things. One portion of those funds are used for educational or school infrastructure projects. So the net effect is you start to see referendums go away, which is, of course, people locally like that because referendums can be...
We had 82 referendums this week, and I don't know, it was 70 some that passed. It was a about a little less than a dozen that failed.
Yep.
But still, those districts are likely to come back and have another referendum. And
Yeah.
so we're seeing tons of referendum as
Exactly.
a result of that.
So what Iowa found is that that's one way to see those go away. The second portion of those monies go directly towards property tax relief. So it's kind of a win-win in the model that they've devised. And ultimately, I know I'm going to get kind of high level on this, is that you can't look at just one area, right? Because you could look at that and say, well, okay, I was doing that way and it works for them, but maybe Wisconsin's doing something different in our overall collection model that is advantageous or not as advantageous. But back to the point. So I then went to what's called Legislative Fiscal Bureau. Think of that as our CPAs, our big accounting firm in the state of Wisconsin.
Right.
We have a phenomenal director who runs that. He's run it for many, many years. He has forgotten more than most people will know. But what we do, I said, I want you to take the Iowa formula model, and I want you to run Wisconsin actual numbers through it, right? Let me get a sense of how would this play out in the state of Wisconsin. And the effect of that would produce somewhere in the neighborhood, depending upon the collection year or sales year, $600 to $700 million. This isn't trivial. And I will tell you also, because this is important, as a conservative, I'm not one to go running around wanting to raise taxes.
Right.
Back to your point on the elderly or people who are coming out of the COVID period, raising taxes is not the place to go. So where we ultimately landed, I started developing kind of a coalition within my chamber, within the House. The chair of Ways and Means, the educational committee chairs, starting to raise this subject. And invariably where we landed, and this isn't going to solve it for us this year, and I talked to Superintendent Ouellette and I broke that news to him, but not all that different than what you said a moment ago about how good legislation sometimes takes a couple sessions to bake its way through. I believe that the subject of educational funding in the state of Wisconsin as a whole, coupled with the entire tax code, it's coming up. We're on a collision course in a good way of looking deeply at this and not just taking one isolated area and pulling a lever, but instead saying, what are all the cause and effects of these things and how can we do a better job? If you allow me to elaborate one last second,
Sure.
This is why I've thought about this a lot. So a couple just random opinions from one representative. The Wisconsin per pupil funding formula, in my humble opinion, is broken. I don't think it, some states say we've got it a lot better here. Well, I'd hate to see how bad it is in those states then, because of the conditions you described a moment ago. They're real. And I'm going to be critical here for a moment of MPS, Milwaukee Public School System. Mm-hmm. The sheer amount of money that MPS gets in comparison to River Falls, Roberts, Hudson, you name it, is astronomical. And it's very frustrating. I'm not taking a thing away from the kids in the greater Milwaukee area, but proportionally speaking, we're not just talking a few percentage points more. It's double and triple the full per pupil aid that you're getting in Hudson at times. And the outcomes, sadly, this is living proof that money doesn't buy success. Because the outcomes, if you take the performance of River Falls or Hudson and you compare that to Milwaukee, staggeringly different. We are crushing the performance. Now, what bothers me is at the root of this are some good kids, right, in that area. But we live in a full, big state. And my philosophy here is rising tides are going to lift all boats. We got to rethink this. We've got to do this better so that we can address the funding for education, do it in as efficient way as possible. Last stat I had, this is subject to some change, for every tax dollar that goes into Wisconsin, approximately 53 cents of that dollar will actually make its way to Hudson School or the schools. Mm-hmm. Where's the other 47 cents going? Right? These are the questions that I believe can be asked, answered, and this can be addressed more holistically. But this
as long as we don't wait until all possible, details and effects of the legislation get worked out. If we can just tweak the school funding thing, this is more of a major tweak because you're getting a different revenue source. But I think the idea is to try and separate out what happens in a lot of districts, and that's the competition between bricks and mortar and programs for kids.
Right. And a couple of other demographic points that are worth noting. Right, overall number of student human beings in the state of Wisconsin is declining. The Wisconsin population, the workforce is declining. My contention, my strategy, kind of trying to apply maybe a different philosophy in this is, I believe that one of the ways we offset that, correct that, remedy that, and I believe it has to be remedied because employers are resourceful. If they can't get workforce, they're going to start to go elsewhere. When that happens, a lot of bad things happen for the state of Wisconsin, for our companies, for our families who mom and dad are working locally here in Hudson and they need to provide. My belief is that if we can differentiate our state from a tax code perspective, we're going to import from Minnesota, Iowa, certainly Illinois, where taxes are through the roof, and Michigan. We're not probably going to get Floridians to want to come up here. They're not going to deal with our winters. But you're going to get Illinois folks and Minnesota folks to say, more of my money is mine in Wisconsin. I'm going to move there. I'm going to raise my kids there. If they're going to go to Hudson School, I'm going to take a job in St. Croix County. We're going to start to collect, kind of the peripheral tax from that act. That, to me, is a key focus area for solving a whole bunch of challenges. Lastly, and I think our area schools did a good job, this pandemic era has also, I think, brought some innovations to light. Schools were forced to adapt, to modify the manner in which sometimes education was delivered. Now, I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that in the impressionable years of K through 12 that we're going virtual for everything. I don't believe in that at all. I think kids at those formative years, they have to see their teachers and hear and learn. But I do believe that we learned a lot of things to be more efficient and more innovative. So, Jamie, I think the combination of all those things, and you're right, we can't wait till it's perfect. It needs to be addressed, and I think we're getting very close to these subjects being taken up and getting addressed once and for all.
Okay, good. Now we've got just a couple minutes left, and I wanted to touch on, because you are on joint finance, and I know we're on 2-year budget cycles. Yep. So, and it's usually, we're at the end of the budget cycle, right? Yep. And so when we have a gubernatorial election like we have coming up in November, then a new governor comes in, introduces his budget, and then we start all over. And so next spring of 2023, there's going to be a big focus on, fighting for the dollars, and so to speak. Oh, yeah. And so the non-financial bills are not going to be, as prevalent or pushed
in the early phase. It's budget focused initially. You are correct.
And so my question is, how are things setting up for that? Because we see Minnesota, and I view that as a higher tax state, and they're swimming in money, billions of excess dollars. So how are we doing at this stage in the budget cycle in Wisconsin?
Well, fiscally, some people might not like to hear this, but I would use the same word for Wisconsin, and we're swimming in money as well. The surplus in the state right now is the projected additional surplus is projected at another $3.8 billion. That's a B. Okay. Dollars. We have arguably maxed out our rainy day fund under the Constitution of the state. There's a certain percentage. Once we hit it, we're done. That fund,
you can't add to it anymore.
No, it's done. That fund is sitting at $1.72 billion. So, stop there. You're north of $5 billion against what last biennium was an $80 billion total budget. Okay, so big numbers. You're right. There will be a lot of people with a lot of brilliant ideas and a lot of ways to spend that money. I believe that there's a great balance to be had. Serving on the budget committee, I hope this doesn't shock anybody. It kind of shocked me coming from the private sector, the real economy, from business, when you first get to government. Every single year at the company we ran here locally, when we would get into budget season, the first question I would ask of all my leaders is, what efficiency opportunities exist in your organization, in your unit? You got 5% in there? Because not every idea would have proven itself successful. And invariably, let's just say we came up with 10%. Okay, we're starting already at 10% down. Now where do we want to add or maybe make some strategic investments predicated on a return? Sadly, sometimes in government, they start with just where they were last time and they just want to add. Right. The job of joint finance is not to be hypercritical, but we're defending the taxpayer. We're trying to balance priorities. Which is a greater priority, right? Making sure that our students are properly funded. I think we all would agree that's really important. But what about grandma and grandpa at Christian Community Homes in Hudson as well? Well, that's pretty important too. So people will certainly lobby with great passion for their priorities. But the reality is we do have a lot more dollars to work with. I would expect the following. I think you're going to see formula changes, maybe potentially in the things we were just talking about, in a renovation of the student funding formula, making it better. More dollars get to our schools. Teachers, in my opinion, I would step out of the per pupil funding model, and I would direct order funding to go to teacher salaries. You know, there's some who say, oh my gosh, why would you do that? There's others who say, thank you for doing that. I'm just simply looking at it as an employer. I'm hiring right now in this area.
Right.
Do you know how hard it is to get people? And let alone get people at what they used to make? That's just inflation. That's what we're dealing with, right? So education's no different. But yes, Jamie, there's going to be a lot of money, and I will do my best to prioritize the right things for the district I represent and the Wisconsin residents, but also that Wisconsin taxpayer, because that's not the state's money. They're holding it right now. That is the fixed income elderly people in Hudson's money. That is the family who's got, you know, kids and they're trying to figure out how they're going to play or pay for football or hockey in Hudson. So it will be a balancing act, but we enter the budgetary process not in a down position. We are in a very strong position.
And that's despite the inflation numbers right now.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me, they probably lament on this all the time, right? Why is that happening? Well, I think there's a lot of things contributing to it, right? You can't put $4, $5, $6 trillion into an economy nationally now and not expect it to have an effect. It's going to have an effect. You're going to see a surge. We're not just talking PPP or, you know, $1,300 stimulus checks. You know, a lot of money is going to a lot of programs which trigger new, you know, roads being built, bridges being fixed. Okay, so you can't put that much money into an economy and not see an effect. Personally, and one day history will tell us if all that money we put on our grandkids' credit cards was a good or bad thing. I don't know. I think we probably went a little far, but that is undoubtedly having still an effect on that. And then, frankly, I think that there were participants in the workforce that were sent home during COVID. Maybe a dual income family, and some of them are going, I don't know, maybe I'll find a new alternative. Maybe I'll more family time. There's a variety of contributing factors to this, but it's real.
Okay. Well, any other parting shots? Because we've kind of come to our end of our half hour.
Look, it's a great community. We did some good things for Hudson. I worked with Mayor O'Connor on the library issues, some downtown river stuff, River Falls, UW River Falls Science and Tech Building. I'm going to keep fighting for the pro-workforce, pro-economy stuff, and managing taxes for our great community.
And how can people get a hold of you if they want to talk about education issues?
Oh, well, they would call 608-266-1526, or they can go through the state's website, contact me there, and we do that frequently. I talk to a ton of people every week.
All right, very good. Shannon, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it.
And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and keep watching.